Hello, everyone. I'm Kathleen Woodward, a nationally certified school psychologist and also a regional manager for clinical education with Pearson, and looking forward to talking with everyone today.
Chris?
Hey, good afternoon or good morning where you're at here today. Glad to talk to you all virtually. My name is Chris Huzinec. I'm a clinical consultant who works a lot with our behavioral products.
All right, Dr. Maraffa, make sure you're off mute.
Hi, I'm Doug. I'm you. Thank you, Dr. Bauserman. Yeah, we're really glad to be here. This is our third year to open this up, so we're very excited and really glad that you guys took the time to be here. So welcome.
Great, thanks everybody. I'm Dr. Adam Bauserman. I am a senior educational consultant with VB360. Do a lot of work with onboarding and training with this product, and have been working with Dr. Maraffa the last several years doing this, and we're excited to do it again. So with that being said, let's start kind of heading through what we're going to talk about today. A couple of graphics here that really probably promote what today is like. We're pulling our hair out, you're pulling your hair out. It's very difficult to kind of think of MTSS, how we get this moving, how we get this rolling, these systems of support. And so we really want to think about some of the big target areas that we want to discuss. So we want to talk about how do you develop an MTSS system, how do you implement that, and ultimately how you evaluate something like that. So we're really going to kind of work through that. But it is, at times feels like you're pulling your hair out. So we want to kind of ease your pain with that. And, hopefully after you've been with us today, that this graphic won't be, what you're doing when we're done. So why we created this kind of framework is in order for us to conceptualize MTSS. Okay, so we really have to we have to have structure in a way that we are going to develop, implement, and evaluate an MTS system of support. We want to make sure that we are hitting all the components that go in there so we can use this framework in order to identify any components that are happening that we may need to get better at. And so looking at those components in a systematic way to kind of feel what are we missing, how do we support this? And we have to be able to support lots of different student need. And through this conceptual framework, we can help kind of guide that process, whether you're looking at it academically, behaviorally, or social, emotionally. So just kind of keep this graphic in mind as Dr. Maraffa moves through these slides. We just want to make sure that we're really trying to find where are you and what you need help with in order to get this moving. So really kind of our goal for today is that we're identifying components. We are, looking at how we build capacity. There's lots of different things that we really want to do, but we want to identify the components of MTSS today and put it in perspective so we know exactly what we need to have in place in order to move forward. Okay. When you're doing this, we're just giving kind of a larger overview, but also I talked just briefly a little bit as, there's academic, there's behavior, there's SEL, but also just the true MTSS process that we will be going more in depth with that. We will be providing a 4-part series for MTSS. We'll be providing a 4-part series for SEL, and we'll also be doing a 4-part series on behavioral. So looking at this from a big perspective today, we will be offering up additional series of how to kind of drive into some of those targeted areas. But today we really want to identify the components of MTSS. So just some webinar expectations. Most of you probably know where the chat room is. We'll be monitoring it that way. So if you want to engage through there, you can. We'll be doing reflection polls throughout this webinar that you can kind of be a part of. And we're also going to do some panel questions. We're going to open it up and have the panelists talk, and we'll have a discussion, and we'll be going kind of, having a nice dialogue about different things. So we're going to have a lot of things going on in order for you to have, a really good experience being, interactive with us and with the webinar.
Adam, this is Chris.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead of using the chat, if you'd like to ask questions, please use the Q&A box, which is right next to the chat box on the bottom of your screen.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And so on the next slide, we're going to be looking at reflection poll number 1. Sherry, are you going to be able to pull that up for us? Perfect, thank you. So the first poll has opened up. It's really describing where are you in your current MTSS framework? Are you still just trying to develop this? Are we trying to actually implement this because we've put it together and then we've done all that part? Are we trying to evaluate that? So if you please just kind of hop in there and choose where you are, it kind of gives us an idea, especially when Dr. Maraffa starts talking, he can kind of tailor to, kind of what the group is looking at. So give it a few more seconds. Absolutely. Thank you, Jerry, for hopping off there. Here are, kind of the results. Looking at, there's still, over half of the participants that voted in here are developing. That's the stage they're in. There's also about a third of them that are trying to implement it. We've developed this and now we're trying to implement it. And then the last piece is, we're there, which is a smaller percentage. We understand that are trying to evaluate that. So hopefully, Dr. Maraffa, that kind of helps you a little bit on where we are headed here. And so with that being said, and thank you all for being in the poll, I will turn it over to Dr. Maraffa.
So thank you, Dr. Bauserman, and so good to be here with you guys. I'm going to encourage the panel, Kathleen, Chris, Adam, please jump in at any time just to really kind of add to some of the content or discussion. Obviously, MTSS, it is everywhere. It's this big giant, and a lot of times we figure out is what's the purpose. And I love to just kind of sum it up to say is we're trying to provide equitable practice, and it's not just for students, it's for staff as well. And building capacity for staff to be that catalyst to implement MTSS, they've got to be empowered as well. And not all staff have the same skill level. So when we talk about equitable practice, we're talking about simply how do I support students? How do I support staff in order for them to reach their goals? That's it. That's as simple as we want to do it. And how we're going to do that is to lay the foundation of all the different components. And remember, this webinar is an overview of the pieces. Hopefully by the end, you'll have a sense of, man, I think I need to do these 3 pieces. I need to build out the scope of these 4 pieces and so on. So that really is the whole idea of today. The walkaway commitment is really just understanding, wow, this is kind of where we need to start. So when we look at the MTSS, we're going to start with Adam. Yeah, go ahead. It's the blank slate. So, Adam showed the graphic of where we are. This is where we're at. We're at the blank canvas. This is where whether you guys have your pieces or not, what we want to do is for this overview is to really lay the foundations in a linear fashion to say, okay, where do we need to start? And where we're going to start is for this whole MTSS is the big one is leadership. And leadership is really where it's going to either grow MTSS. And what we have found, and again, I'll defer to my colleagues as we go out throughout this conversation, is that a lot of times we just don't know why we're doing MTSS. what is the goal and the mission? Is this just a new flavor? Is this just something that, everybody else is doing? And really, what is it? And then the fact that people confuse MTSS with RTI and, oh, it's the same thing. And they're not. And it doesn't mean that that's, malicious and we've got so many different definitions. We need to have a focus of really why we're doing MTSS. And especially for like the time and commitment is, hey, Doug, we know the importance of it. So, we're not putting the time for it. We're not making it a priority. And we definitely have not allocated the resources that are necessary. And that seems to be a lot of things. And I think we'll talk about in the panels is this, why aren't we, putting the resources in when we talk about that? And I will say this, from this slide, the bottom line is what gets leadership charged up is one thing, and that is success. I have seen principals find success with a philosophy, a program, a model, and which has influenced the district leadership in moving towards a positive direction. So if you're at a district and you're struggling with getting the leadership to support you, I'm telling you, document your successes, provide some kind of testimony what that is, highlight it, put it in charts and graphs, and I promise you, leadership will move with that. So when we think about the first big step, we're looking at a problem-solving process. So when the leadership says, hey, let's do this, a lot of times we want to just dive into interventions. And the problem with that is we don't really know what we're supposed to do with these interventions. And it's crazy to think is let's just throw some really good evidence-based strategies and let's just fill up the district toolbox with a lot of different positive programs. But what are we supposed to do? Where are we supposed to do this at? So the problem-solving process, again, if you guys don't have one, it's to look at identifying what's going on. Here's the example. We got a bullying problem at Johnson District, okay? Well, that doesn't really tell me much. You know what? We've got a bullying problem at the elementary schools. No, we've got a bullying problem at the elementary schools in grades 3 and 4. And we've got a bullying problem with grades 3 and 4 on the playground. And we've got a verbal bullying program, not a physical program. So you can see through that problem-solving process, being able to understand the scope of what's going on in our district and to be able to operationalize it, define it so specifically that it makes it so easy to understand what's causing this. Oh, we got one teacher out in the playground that's trying to monitor 150 kids. Now we're seeing some causes. So again, that problem-solving process, which we'll delve into in the series, it's something you really need to focus on.
Dr. Maraffa, this is something that I've dealt with districts many, many times, is not collecting the correct data to even try to problem solve. Biggest one that comes to mind is code of conduct. So it's 80% of all of their incidents and their problems, and code of conduct could be 55 different things. So they can't even narrow it down, operationalize it at all, because they don't have the data to figure it out. Sometimes it's start there.
It is, yeah. The incident management there's definitely an art and science to doing the analytics on incident management, which can make a big difference. So what happens when we get the problem-solving process down, then we want to shift into what we call data-based decision-making process. And that process builds on your problem solving in the sense of saying, what are the solutions to these problems and causes? What are we going to do? And how are we going to implement? And it's not just data-based decision like, Doug, we're going to do this program and we're going to do something that that's been recommended by some group or some company or some vendor. No, what we're going to do is we're going to implement every day, every other day, 2 times a day. So the idea, or we're going to have conferences, we're going to have social skills training, we're going to have whatever it is. I think where a lot of people, when they look at data-based decisions, if you're doing it with high fidelity, you're creating data-based decisions that are completely based on need. And a lot of districts are spending a lot of effort, way more than they have to, because they haven't had a focus on their need, and they haven't had a focus on how they intervene. So again, before we move on to the next slide, is just know that once we get the leadership start to get involved, or whether the leadership is waiting for us to be successful, is we have got to establish a problem solving, and we've got to establish a database decision. Then once we do that, then we're going to apply the RTI process. This is where the RTI process comes in. And again, these next two slides are going to show, again, if anything that you guys walk away with today, it's understanding is, Doug, I know what RTI is, but I don't know if we have a systemic or a systematic way to implement this process. That's where schools that are very successful and the ones that struggle, because they haven't really figured out how to do the process systematically. And you'll notice, again, with response to intervention, what we've got to focus here on this one is, if I walked into your district or your school, would I be able to pull in a teacher and ask that teacher, can you explain the benchmarks, the thresholds, the criteria for moving kids through the RTI process? And if teachers can't explain it to me, then we usually say, you know, and I like to ask about 4 or 5 teachers. And if they can't really specifically say, this is the RTI process, then we're all just kind of doing different things. So when we look at the next slide, what we're looking at there is a more detailed look at the RTI process. And again, we're not going to get much into the specifics, because we'll do that in the 4-part series. But for now, it's looking at the components of, again, school districts and schools that have struggled to really lay the foundation, the universal foundation for MTSS. Doug, we don't have a core curriculum. Yeah, we've got the state telling us what our knowledge and skills that we have to do, but we haven't turned those into a really enriching and viable curriculum at the district level. And not only have we not done the curriculum, we haven't really taught our teachers what those best instructional practices are in the academic. What are those best behavioral practices, or those social emotional practices? And again, and again, you'll see that academically, for people that have adopted differentiated instruction, that have adopted universal design for learning, these are just very simple ways to, again, make the curriculum, make the instruction, being able to say, we're going to focus on students' needs. That's the equitable practice. Being able to, again, identify. For SEL, we've seen so much of the SEL struggle for schools that do struggle with SEL, because they don't know how to integrate all of that lesson planning, all the benchmarks and expectations into the instructional environment. You've got the classroom teacher says, why am I doing SEL? SEL is, if anything has ever been that warrants a full integration, it's social emotional learning, because it's things that we should all do as adults and kids every day. So again, figuring that out, that really, again, is the struggle with teachers, is how do we do that? So that's something that we'll talk about in depth when we start developing and really looking at and implementing this kind, when we talk about it in the series. So I wanted to open up to Kathleen, Chris, and Adam, and really just looking at how we the struggles, because I've seen a lot. I don't know. I know you guys you have seen a lot of schools. You interact with a lot of schools. What do you guys think about the struggles? What have you seen?
Well, Doug, I can start. I think, you know, some of the obstacles come with the disconnect between the problem solving model that you discussed and the data-driven decision making, because, you know, you should, you know, in order to connect that, it helps to identify what kind of data that you want to collect and what kind of data do you want to make decisions on,
Right,
and integrate that into your problem solving model. And that also should be driven by the problems that you're having. So that, you know, if, like you mentioned, bullying is a issue at your school, and you know that from your teachers, that's an area that should warrant more focus. So I think that's one area that another one, and you've mentioned that too, is that when we look at on the behavior side, there's been, and I'm sure many of the folks here have integrated some sort of PBIS. And while I totally agree with you, Doug, and with the leadership being very important, sometimes the leadership decisions don't filter down to the classroom.
Yeah.
Not only do we find that when we go out there, teachers are often asking, why am I teaching behavioral expectations? What am I going to do with these behavior? Is this something extra that I'm now going to have to teach? And you mentioned SEL. That's another issue that we will discuss in further. Is it's even more of a one-off, because when we talk about RTI, behavior's kind of found its niche there, and people are using PBIS.
Right.
But with SEL, it's kind of seen as a one-off. But that's another issue. But then the thing is that, and I think one of the school districts that I worked with and I'd done research with, case studies with, found that by engaging the teachers first, by getting leadership on board, but then engaging the teachers and not building school-wide, but building class-wide first. Because we know from teachers, we know that one of the things they ask, and you mentioned this, one of the things that they ask for most is help in managing their classrooms. And we also know that teachers, early career teachers who leave the profession, one of the main things that they cite is issues with addressing and supporting and reducing disruptive behaviors in the classroom. And one of our, we worked with one of our districts where we started, okay, here, we're going to give you the essential elements of how to manage your classroom. We're going to provide the training. We're going to help you, provide it to you that you can do the training on your own pace. And we're going to support you in that. We're going to talk about afterwards, after we get that in place, we're going to talk about how can we ramp that up to be school-wide. And actually, we found that we got better buy-in from the teachers. We actually got better buy-in from the administrators. They felt that the teachers.
That's the process. Yeah, I think that's what you're saying, Chris, is the process. Because I know Dr. Bauserman, and when you talk about this, because I know you had some of your districts that you were talking, you said about how difficult it was to convince people of certain different behavior philosophies, and there's so much out there,
Yeah, I think that they're overwhelmed at times and they don't even know where to start. So I think that's kind of where they get bogged down. And we noticed that a lot of them with developing was kind of the stage they were in, is it's really hard. And you're going to have a lot of varying opinions in the room. And do we even have a team that wants to attack this and put it together? And do those people on the team have the skill sets needed to build this process for us? And so I think that's kind of the struggle, is that when I first came where I live now, they felt they were way ahead of the game in RTI and MTSS, and they were only about 7 years behind. So I guess they were quite a ways ahead, but they were trying to utilize different departments that should have never been a part of the process. They were bringing all these people in because they had no idea what they were doing. And so they went to all the experts and brought them in, and it more looked like a special ed model right out of the gate than anything else. And so I think that's where people are. It's hard. It can be a monumental task to take this on.
Well, and Kathleen,
Kathleen, you touched on a couple things there that I was going to mention as well, as problematic as districts are starting to develop their policies and procedures around MTSS. One is, how do we involve special education? How do we align with what they're doing currently and what we need to do moving forward? Also, programs that might already exist, not just at the district level, but individual building levels. So a lot of times buildings have chosen an SEL program, for example, that they're already implementing. How does that fit into the bigger picture? Where do we align that programming in our new model? And then the third component that I think districts oftentimes struggle with is, what's the difference between behavior and social emotional learning? And mental health, where does mental health fall? We know that there's a big focus right now on mental health of our students, of our teachers, of our staff. Where does that fall in the big scheme of things in terms of MTSS? How do we address it? How do we screen for mental health issues? Do we do that within a behavioral framework? Do we do that within our SEL framework? Those are questions that I oftentimes get as I'm working with districts and talking about their programming needs.
That's perfect, because I do think, Kathleen, I love, especially when you say the definition, because I hear a lot of counselors, social workers talk about it's emotional before it's behavioral, and understanding that and how it would drive what you do as a district. And people want to throw out everything and start over, and you're like, no, you guys already have established some really good strategies, evidence-based strategies that have worked. Just be mindful of what those are in your evaluations and stick with them. And maybe you're not too far behind on the pieces. So yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I think that's important.
Yeah, there's definitely an overlap between the two. And I think, again, we're all limited on resources.
Yeah.
When we're working out in the schools, we know we're limited on resources, and that if you've established something to support behavior and you want to address social emotional learning, if you look at it, there's the similarities between the skills that are often taught for social emotional learning and the overlap with our expectations that we use for our students within the behavioral MTSS. There's a great similarity, and that's definitely an area that you don't have to redraw the map, you don't have to reinvent the process. And again, I think this is one of the goals, Doug, you and Adam first started out with this series, is saying this is a framework, and as a framework it can be used for academics, it can be used for behavior, it can be used for social emotional learning, and we can tie all three things together.
And I will say this, because I want to ask the group too, is before we ask the group, is really thinking about how, like Kathleen was saying, is if you guys can start breaking up when you think about identifying what works and not, especially with teachers, break it up into content. Do teachers understand the content, whether it's academic, behavior, social, emotional? And once they do, then you can start developing the skill sets. And if they're doing the skill sets, are they doing it with fidelity? So you can start to see the shaping process. And when you start to see it that way, it's much easier to build capacity in your district when you break it up like that. So that's just another thing. And I think, Adam, it'd be a good time to maybe ask them, the group, what their thoughts are on some of the struggles.
I don't know if I can open up the poll.
Can you go ahead and share? And then
I'll share, and I think Sherry did it last time.
Sherry, can you go ahead and do that poll number 2?
Poll number 2.
All right.
There it is. So basically, as a group, we were just kind of thinking of, what are your challenges? We talked about things that we have seen, and we've worked with lots and lots of districts, and made some comment to those. But looking at leadership, looking at problem solving, what process are you having the most difficulty doing? And hopefully we'll get a lot of variance. I'm thinking we probably will, because we're kind of in this overview talking about each one of these pieces a little bit. But as they're doing the poll, I'll mention that you alluded, Doug, that said teach them the content. I have a friend who is a 25-year teacher, maybe more, maybe like 26 or 7, who knows, but is asked to do SEL and has no idea really what it is. And they just said, well, you're gonna have to do this in your class, and walked away. And that was it. Wow. I mean, so they're just saying, here, learn it on your own. If you don't know how to do it, then, too bad.
Yeah.
That usually doesn't go well with especially a teacher that's been there for 25 days or 25 years. It wouldn't matter.
That's right. Well, and I also think this poll will also help you guys reflect on, maybe more, maybe you feel more comfortable or confident on some of the things you guys are already doing. And maybe you'll start to figure out some of the gaps and deficiencies you might have. And then that would lead into maybe, participating in a more in-depth look in our series. So Hopefully we've got, Sherry, we got the results.
The results.
It's slowing down.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
They're
keep
still
going.
voting. Yeah,
Yeah, right. I know.
which is great.
That's a lot to read.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see what the breakdown is.
Yeah.
It looks like we've stopped. So here you go.
I was afraid of all of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I'm not, again, we're all just, yeah. Well, that's very interesting. Yeah. 19 on building teacher capacity, and that's such an important one. Cool. Well, cool. Thank you guys so much. This is so
Pretty
helpful.
well spread out though.
Yeah, it is spread out.
All right.
Cool. All right. So the next piece, it really, again, for the panel and all you guys, is looking at this idea of how we identify the student need. And we really promote this idea of looking at how we identify problems and how we analyze problems. And so what we recommend is really looking at, do you guys have tools at the district that allows you to do screening? Academic screeners, I think somebody on one of the chats talked about AimsWeb Plus. That gives us a itemized map of what's going on academically. People that have done social emotional screeners, behavioral screeners, BASC, BEST3, SSIS, SEL, SABRE. I know there's others out there. If you're on the Q&A and you want to put up a screener that you like, that's a great way to identify the problem. And then what we need are assessments. A lot of these tools that you're using will have a second component to see the scope of the problem. And that really comes in the form of assessment. So for this piece, when you're looking at building this out, just try to break it up is, can we identify the problem through screening, and can we understand the scope of that problem through assessment? And again, finding tools that allow you guys to do that. I know in the series, Chris Huzinec, he's part of our research director. He's part of that team. He has actually put together a resource list that he's actually working on, not quite done yet, but he's going to put a resource list together of identifying some of those really, really effective tools that are recommended by groups, out in the country. So again, it's just pausing to say, I can't do MTSS if I can't put kids in some kind of tier levels of need. And then once we do that, then we move to what we call our interventions. And this is where equitable practice is applied. Johnny needs something. Maria needs something. Demetrius needs something. Well, how do we know what they need? We figured out through screening and assessment, and now we want to offer these interventions. So what that means is, as a district, as a school, what you're doing is, we've got to provide that array, that spectrum of tiered levels of needs. And we've got to make sure we're looking at, research-based theoretical concepts for our universal. We've got to make sure that we're looking at evidence-based kinds of strategies for our tier and 2, 3. Again, things that we know have worked, that have shown to work. Do we have that array that we bring into the classroom? The most common thing I hear from high school teachers when I do training is that their toolbox is very small. I've got one or two things, and then I send the kid to the office. Why? Well, this is high school, and the kids have high expectations. We've got kids going to college. You've heard it, and it is. I know that's important, but what we found is that when the high school teacher is empowered with an array of strategies, office referrals go down dramatically. The feeling of feeling safe and feeling like, hey, I'm included, goes way up. So again, thinking about the interventions and thinking about, do these work? That's that second piece when we talk about progress monitoring. So when you guys are building out the intervention piece, not only do we have to come up with an array of what's happening, but Are we doing any kind of progress monitoring? You know, can we look at some progress monitoring tools that, again, are going to be able to tell us, hey, this works. I am amazed at all the kinds of things that I did when I was in the classroom, and then when I became a consultant, when we found out that it's usually one or two things that work really well with the student. And we want every teacher in the building to know that. We want the next year teacher to know what that is. So when we can start figuring out, this is what works for Johnny, let's staple that to the plan, and everywhere Johnny goes, we're going to know that works. And then when we do that, we move on to the next one, which we talk about is, this is, again, I saw the poll when you talk about building capacity. And my recommendation is this: if you're going to put a building capacity program together at your campus, at your school district, you've got to break these down. This is the shaping process. Teacher effectiveness, and I know Chris could attest to this, is he can pull the research. The absolute impact an effective teacher has on the instructional environment, on the behavioral environment, on the social emotional learning environment. Teacher effectiveness is huge. Now, how do we build teacher effectiveness? The number one thing, when I work with new teachers, when I work with struggling teachers, I know Dr. Bauserman does too, Kathleen and Chris, we say we've got to find small successes in the classroom. Because what happens is when we coach, because we actually have a coaching process, is say we coach the teacher to say, oh, I found some success. That breeds confidence. And when you start to see the teacher say, I'm feeling more confident, and here's how you'll know. You'll see teachers start to experiment. It's a great litmus test, a great barometer to think, oh, the teacher is starting to feel more empowered because they're experimenting with different strategies. So you've got success, you've got the teacher feeling really confident, and the ultimate is that breeds self-efficacy. So don't let anybody confuse you about that. Confidence is the same thing as self-efficacy. I can have confidence in behavioral interventions, but I have a low self-efficacy when it talks about behavioral interventions with students with autism. So self-efficacy is more of a laser-driven, is I feel very confident in my ability to do very specific things. And so this picture, again, we'll talk more about this in the 4-part series, could really help build capacity. Kathleen, did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to add a couple of things. I saw a couple of notes come through the Q&A, and one of them mentioned teacher burnout and just having the time and the logistics. How do we build that in? How do we do the coaching? How do we get this started? Especially right now as teachers are returning post-pandemic, or well, still mid-pandemic.
Yeah.
We know that there's a serious issue right now with stress and anxiety and burnout and concerns around that for teachers. And so I think, building a supportive system for the teachers is critical right now, letting them know that they are supported, number one, having an empathic approach to your training and the way that you're presenting the training information, I think is critical right now. And we do have a lot of ideas around that during the development phase. How do you incorporate the training options to build the capacity? And we have to have the logistics in place. And so I think that at the development level is a critical discussion, and also teacher buy-in in terms of, I'm overwhelmed right now. Like I'm just here surviving every day at work. I don't have the time, energy, interest to take on something new. And we need to help them get past that and engage in this process, not only to help the students, but to help the teachers feel better about their own capacity and ability, and build confidence within themselves as well.
No, that's well said. In fact, Kathleen, I would sum it up like this. I have found the best leaders. This is what they say. Before I ask you what you can do for your students, I'm going to ask, what can I do for you? And I think that has encapsulated everything you said, Kathleen, is before you start asking teachers to do one more thing, why don't you offer what can I do for you first, then ask them what they can do for you, do for everybody else, because I can't imagine being a teacher right now. It's so overwhelming, and everybody on this call is trying to support all the people that are overwhelming, and so they're overwhelmed as well. We do need to pause. We all need to pause and say, okay, how do we get ourselves social emotionally right and feeling safe and secure and confident? You're right, Kathleen. Otherwise the strategies are just not going to make any sense, you know? So yeah, well said. So I know we're moving. So I think the next one is really just this process of building a collaborative process and a communication process. So again, two important factors that whatever we're doing as teachers, I've seen schools build together this collaborative process where they actually give time for these teachers to come together and collaborate. I don't mean just time to generate the lesson. I mean time to really collaborate on what works. The other part is that communication that we have to parents, to the community, communicating our results, communicating everything. That back and forth is huge. So again, as you guys start to look at these pieces, start reflecting on, wait a minute, you know, I don't know if we really communicate like we should. Do we communicate to our staff, to our leaders, to our parents, to our students? Do we have a collaborative process with the community, with grade level teams, with the leadership team? Are we working in isolation? So those are some good questions. And then what we look at is the idea of the ultimate. All this leads to what we ultimately want to do is positive student outcomes. So again, we're not waiting to the end of the year to do that yearly benchmark, that yearly test. What we want to do is you guys have got to come up with some measurement kinds of things throughout the school year. Like we do academic benchmarks every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks. What are the behavioral benchmarks? What are the social emotional learning benchmarks? How do we know what works and what isn't? How do we know that we're actually seeing positive student outcomes if we're not incorporating some kind of behavioral social emotional measurement? So again, that might be something that you want to focus on as one of the components and so on. Because what I always say is this, you don't even have to focus on positive student outcomes. Focus on all the other pieces that we just talked about, and I promise you the positive student outcomes will come. And then the last thing is really looking at the whole picture. So this is where we started. So the idea of where we're going to generate our effort, where we're going to generate, you know, the resources, the allocation, the priority. As we look at this graphic and we see how all these things work together, they're integrated systematically. And just keep telling yourself that process, systematic. How do we do that? We would love for you guys to be part of our 4-part series so that we can, obviously, we want to help you build this. We're going to go in a lot more depth for each one of these components over a 4-part series. And so hopefully this all makes sense. So Adam, I think the last one is really looking at how we evaluate this system. We'll talk more about how we evaluate. I know a lot on the polls. Before we even get to evaluation, it seems like a far thing away, but we'll talk about that in the 4-part series. But I think I'd like to mention is the next one, Adam, is really looking at these opportunities. So what we thought from the last 2 years is Dr. Bauserman and I, for the last 2 years, we're doing the MTSS. And then what we thought was we really need to build out an opportunity for everyone that has participated to go more in depth. So we want to bring in more district examples. We want to spend more time in really showing people how to develop. So we are offering an MTSS 4-part series that's going to be specifically designed on how to build out your MTSS parts. Then what we brought in Chris Huzinec to really talk about this SEL 4-part series, again, to really be able to have an opportunity to get into more district examples, to get in more specific tools, more specific interventions, more specific processes. And then Kathleen's going to really help us with the MTSS as well as the SEL and behavior. So but the 4 people on this panel have so much experience that we are so excited to be able to share within each of these four. If you want to join us for all three, that would be awesome because we love sharing, our experience. We love hearing from you guys. But one of the things I'll just note before we open for questions is you're going to get a flyer at the end when you get an email about the recording, and you'll get a flyer that will give you an opportunity to actually sign up. The only way to sign up is you don't click anything. You have to call that number. So it's just something a little different that we're trying for this series. Is we want you to call in and talk to us about which ones those are. So Adam, I'm going to stop there and really look at the panel again and really just open it up for, I think we're at that point, right? Yeah. Questions?
We can look down in the Q&A. Here's a good one. How do you build teacher capacity for students to receive the extra 40-minute tutoring for 2 or 3 times a week? So it sounds like that's almost a manpower issue.
Yeah, I think, and you know what else? I just, one example is I've actually seen schools bring in mentors and volunteers to actually read for students, tutor students. And you know what? That doesn't cost you anything. But to be able to bring in a volunteer or a mentor 2 days a week, now we've got the RTI process where we're working at really looking at this child just needs more frequent support. So I say get creative in a sense of start thinking outside the box about who you could bring in to do that. Having a high school kid come in and read for an elementary student, that still could fall under RTI services in a sense of we're offering more time, more intense time for the student to read, to do math, to do whatever it is. So I think logistically, lots of schools have done it well, Dr. Bauserman, but I think, and I defer to all you guys, you have a better answer.
We did a lot of peer tutoring. Some of the older kids that came in. So I taught 6th grade in elementary, so they would go down and work with the little ones and vice versa. I mean, the little ones would come up and do different things. We had PAL systems. There was all different kinds of things that they could use because it is sometimes truly just a numbers game. We just don't have enough teachers for that amount of time for that amount of kids. So that was a good one. Someone put, unfortunately, due to COVID, no one outside is allowed on our campuses. So again, you may have to fall onto the tutors of the kids. And I always recommend that the smartest kid in your class is always not the best tutor.
Right.
I've met some really smart people that don't like to, they won't show you how to do it or teach you how to do it. They'll just do it for you because they get frustrated. So
schools are using virtual volunteers. So you're setting up, if you have the technology, and a lot of schools now are at least getting the technology if they don't already have it in place. And there are virtual volunteer programs. So that could be a possibility.
Kathleen, I would venture to say you probably could get more virtual volunteers than the physical, because I mean, hey, stay at your house and take them through this structured tutoring. I think you could get a lot of people to do that. So yeah, that's a great idea.
This is a comment, but I think we could talk to it. It says that, there's the systematic reviews are good. There's great ideas. The hard part is there's not sufficient training or continued support. So it all starts and fizzles and there's no fidelity.
Yeah. And I remember a teacher telling me, she goes, "Hey, Doug, we're doing portfolio training in September." Oh, okay, great. So I come visit her at the end of October. I said, "Hey, how's your portfolio going?" And she said, "Doug, they've never once asked me about my portfolio." So I stopped using it. So, and it goes back to what I said about leadership understanding is if no one is really reporting out the positive outcomes to what we're trying to do, if no one's really highlighting the steps that we're making, whether they're small, medium, or large, if no one's doing that, you're right, it's going to die. I have seen that so often. But if you go out of your way and say, hey, every 3 weeks, we're going to send something and we're going to say, hey, this is how many kids have moved from this to this, or this is how many kids have gotten, positive behavior intervention and support kinds of, accolades, whatever it is. Find your measurements and report that out. And I'm telling you, it will. Obviously, it's not, it's not always going to be a panacea to say, well, we're going to do one thing or two things. It's going to change everything. But I'm telling you, I have seen so many people move that dial to buy in when they start to see results and hold people accountable about what they're doing. So that's been my experience.
And this comment and question kind of runs on the same tether. The biggest challenge is the logistics. Time for coaching, time for PD, coverage for classrooms, things like that. When you're looking at certain things, that what I've encountered is when we hear the big scary SEL that's coming down, and it's what you would do all the time. I mean, one of them is truly asking for help. I mean, if you do that all the time, you're teaching them and talking to them. I don't have to have a scripted thing on how to tell a kid, remind them this is how we ask for help, and you're doing it all day long. So I think that's part of where they think they have to go and get trained and certified and have a certificate and have, where it's not as daunting as I think that it kind of plays out to be at times.
And I go back to what Kathleen mentioned is I think a lot of times when I'll go into a very toxic environment, obviously they want help. And I think sometimes it's, well, Doug, let's do training. And I say, you know what? You don't need training right now. You need people just to vent. You need people just to get off the fact that they're tired, they're frustrated, they're angry, and they don't feel supported. So how do I make them feel supported first? And then let me start to introduce some of the training. And I find that they're much more susceptible. I used to do this when I consulted with teachers. I'd go into Miss Johnson. I say, hey, Miss Johnson, 0 to 10. 10, you want to kill the kid. 0, you just want to do everything for the kid. And when the teacher said 10, I knew that I can't say anything after that about strategies, programs, interventions. I had to say, tell me, why are you so frustrated and angry? Now, I had to get all that out first, because everything I said wouldn't work because they're just frustrated. And we got a lot of frustrated educators. So I think sometimes when we're starting to look at the specific logistics, which I know we need to get to, ask yourself first, do we need to really kind of pause and to make sure everyone feels okay about implementing and training and learning and all that kind of stuff?
And I think, breaking them up into smaller sessions sometimes can be also, not only is it more manageable for teachers to break away for 30 minutes than it is for 3.5 hours where you need to replace them with subs and all the logistics that go with that. But also it creates a sense of continuity where they're getting 30 minutes once a week as kind of a reminder or a check-in. As we're getting the training, we're also checking in, how are you doing? Right. And it helps with fidelity along the way. So there's different modes of providing the coaching, the training, and the opportunities that they need to have to be able to learn. And so we might have to, get creative or explore. And like Doug said, we want to make sure and do a temperature check with where are people and where are they right now in terms of learning. Did they get bombarded with that during the pandemic because they were on Zoom all day, or where are they right now in terms of their ability and desire to learn about this, and addressing that first, and then going forward and providing that training when they're more perceptive to it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
There's a couple that popped in, and I think they would be best answered in the 4-part series because it's really kind of getting down into the weeds. One is documentation. How do we progress monitor, data collect? How do we even teach our staff how to do that? So that's kind of in the series. We'll talk about that is an important piece. And if you don't have staff that can't collect data, then it's going to be all for naught at times. But there was a couple people that really jumped on what Kathleen said in a positive way about surviving. They're just trying to survive. And I heard a guy one time, I was on one of the talent shows, that says, because he adopted 5 or 6 kids, And when they're in those type of foster care settings, sometimes they're just surviving. And when you're surviving, you can't ever thrive because you're just trying to survive. You can't thrive, you can't get better. And so I think that's really important. I think that was very well said by Kathleen. But as we approach, the hour, wanted to thank Dr. Maraffa for leading this, taking us through this journey of MTSS, and Chris, all your insight. I know you've been chatting away in the chat room and the Q&A. I see a lot of your response in there, and Kathleen, it's always nice to have you on there. You gave some great insight into kind of what people are seeing, it a lot of from the human side as well. I think what people are understanding what it means for people. There was a lot of discussion about burnout. I saw that, and I just want to put back up on the screen.
I think the first MTSS session and SEL session are next week. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like the behavioral part isn't until November, but the SEL and I think MTSS, they start next week, and then they'll be once a week, for 4 weeks. So FYI, if you're, like I said, if you're interested.
Right. Yep. MTSS will start next week. It'll go first, and then the next day would be SEL, and they'll continue to do that for the next 4 weeks. And then as those finish up, then the behavior FourPart will kick off. But just wanted to thank everybody on the panel. Thanks to Sherry as well for doing all this. And we hope to see you guys at, any or all of the FourPart series.
Adam, somebody, what all these are going to be at 1 o'clock
1 o'clock Central.
Yeah.
Great question.
Somebody
1 o'clock Central. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can go live or you can get them on demand. So, well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon. Hopefully, maybe next week.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys. All right. Take care.
Bye, everyone.